Guts was the man who had everything, by violence and by determination, by growth and by merit, by ascension, by apotheosis. The white swordsman had retrieved that which was lost, and it was all thanks to that person. The white wolf knew what it meant to be whole, and he reveled in that glorious sensation. The wolf had been denied it all, a life of freedom, a legion to call his own, a family to welcome him home, the knight commander, Aran Vorlesh. Who was he exactly to him? A brother, a father, an idol, that which had granted him everything, when hope had been lost, when defeat had been a certainty, when all he knew was guilt. I made him feel alive. I had given him whatever he needed. I was always willing to do it. Guts just had to ask. After all, what more proof did I need? The wolf was mine. He was my progeny, my child, my son. A fortress is built with blood and toil. Only by blood and toil may it be taken. The words come naturally to him. Guts did not know where they came from, only that they were his, and they would always be his. The fortress that was Arlan's way would endure forever. It would stand triumphant in the face of this force of nature. Vecna would die. A few words of wisdom, Grunbeld murmurs from within Dragonslayer. I did not expect that from you of all people, Guts. I got plenty of surprises. Stick around and you might experience the best of them. The white wolf glares at his enemy, this deity that would dare intrude on the dream. Their dream, this world that was worth living. Guts had no doubt, not any more. There was peace when before there was war. The wolf had found his pack and a mate he could love. He discovered a son he never knew he had, who had once been lost to him. He had his revenge. No, he had his justice. The universe did not seem that unfair. If anything, it was wonderful. Just don't die, Guts, Dragonslayer chimes in. It had been some time since it spoke. It was growing weary. A retirement would be in order, and Grunbeld did not know the meaning of the word. The gilded dragon was perfect. I won't. The white wolf pounces on his prey. Vecna isn't prepared for it when the wolf grabs him by the neck, the air enveloping his bones and then launching him into orbit. The necromancer had to admit that this demigod had almost all of the power of his mighty forebearer. When the dark god comes to a stop, he wasn't anywhere near their galaxy, let alone that Earth they resided on. Instead, he was between galaxies, in the blackest night. Shar held dominion here. DJ, Kef Shdiksh Shji, LK4TS, TL, R, Lel Kigriesh, Kappa TS, Kefo. No, I just thought it would be comfortable. It would make for a decent grave. Guts does not stop. When Vecna goes out of his way to cast Ravenous Void, this wolf is prepared and makes use of the affinity which had been afforded to him by birthright. The wind becomes an impenetrable armor. When the black hole collides against it, it is flung back at the necromancer. Guts had realized that he couldn't destroy this spell. Therefore, the next best thing was to simply redirect it. Vecna had only a moment to be surprised before it almost engulfs him, but he had quickly intoned the spell teleport and reappears behind the wolf. When that tenebrous orb comes into contact with a distant galaxy instead, the spiral fades away as if being wiped clean from a canvas. What was left behind was blank, an ivory blemish, this unnatural and stark white hole. Thankfully, that galaxy was already a husk. It was devoid of any life. A swarm of locusts had eaten it all. They were searching for more resources, another banquet to feast on, and this drew their attention. That Earth, which was practically teeming with so much life. They began to salivate at the prospect. Vecna casts Flay for purpose and targets the wolf. Eladi Ri-Jukshi Lel Esh Tui Iax Shelties, Rai-GLTS PA, Shish 3TS, LPH. There was nothing but condescension when he speaks. The necromancer had no microcosm of respect for the white swordsman. Guts had only an instant of recognition before he realized that the magic ignored his impenetrable armor. The spell repurposes everything and attempts to enslave him, his frame contorting as he is flayed alive, rebuilt from the raw materials, and his consciousness is driven into a fog by a curse of servitude. The white wolf does not break even as he dies, and acts before it can be complete. He takes Dragon Slayer, ignites that ethereal blaze, and impales himself on the great sword. Grunbeld had become precise, and so had Guts. They could choose whatever event they wanted from the past to be erased, and in that moment they choose all of this. The spell is dispersed, the wound is undone, the curse never enacted. The white swordsman does not fall, but he was beginning to realize the gravity of this situation. Vecna was unlike any other foe he had faced before, which meant he had to brace himself for anything. "I'm going to make you work for it." Guts felt that spark of divinity within his soul evolve. The white wolf begins a metamorphosis, but what he became was no dire wolf. This was a lycanthrope. His fur was like snow, and his claws could lacerate any demon lord. There was a snout protruding from his face, but he had become anthropomorphic. He did not forgo his mortality entirely because of this, and instead he had reached a kind of synthesis. Guts was not just the white wolf. He was the white swordsman, and everything that implied. The Lord of Wolves. The wind would always belong to him. Guts calls to it, and in the vastness of outer space, where there should have been no air, there is a storm of vengeance. The spell had come to him, and he turned it towards the undying king. Ljiksh ershksh. Vecna had been at a loss. This was not what he expected, a conflagration of things. The winds transpose everything in their way. Bolts of lightning ricochet between clouds. Hail begins to form into meteorites, and acidic rain burns at everything. They churn and transform into a tornado, the tempest becoming a monsoon, and it tears through any vacant oblivion. The King of Worms does not take any risks, and evokes prismatic wall in order to serve as a ward against it. There were 7 layers it would have to penetrate: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. There was no way it could break through the defense of each and every one. When the cyclone collides against the barrier, it does not even take a fraction of a second for it to break through all of them at once. The maimed god had underestimated it, and would pay the price when he is drawn into the gale. Vecna only knew of torture. It had been a millennium, but it had happened. Vecna knew of suffering, and it was at the hands of someone who wasn't even entirely of the divine. Instead, they were a product of sacrilege, a child born of a mortal and the immortal. The undying king is hurled through 100 galaxies, and each one of them was a victim of that swarm. Only their galaxy had been able to escape their notice, their insatiable hunger. Guts does not relent. The white wolf dives into the vortex, Dragon Slayer cleaving through every record of the past. The great sword pierces into Vecna. Yif, Yiji, the undying king had already been humiliated before. He would not tolerate repetition. Vecna casts time stop, and the entirety of the universe is frozen. The Lord of Wolves is rendered harmless. Kifar-yepsi, Ristikar, Shjer, Jaririg Shir, Kifar Jalt Tipsh. He evokes Blade of Disaster, directs it at the White Wolf, and the planar rift bisects him at the waist. Dragon Slayer was a problem. Vecna decides to remedy that. The undying king pulls the great sword out of his chest, and with a flick of his wrist he hurls it away. The great sword spins past this primordial darkness and crashes into the boundary between this plane and the next. There was no way for Dragon Slayer to return in haste without any assistance. Guts only manages to break out of the temporal debility at that exact moment. The white wolf regurgitates all of his viscera, but he had endured worse. It truly was an agony that he knew all of his life. What was one more day? Guts grabs his adversary by the head and he opens his maw. There is a psychic scream, and the necromancer is assailed by everything he could unleash. The white wolf had every memory to share, all of his nightmares. Vecna was appalled by all of it, but manages to escape. He clutches at his head and attempts to make sense of what he had witnessed. This disorientation was unreal. It was worse than anything he ever experienced before. ES 33 for SHGTS ITD GSH2YSHRT GPAKJESH. Vecna regains his composure. This horrid ache would persist, but he had patience. The undying king grabs the werewolf and casts Finger of Death. The negative energy was hungry for the life of this creature. That certainty of his was a mistake. What attention he had was focused entirely on the white swordsman. This confidence of his would be his undoing. It had been a second, and that was all that I needed. "Unhand my son Vecna!" I grabbed the monster. This abomination that had dared lay his hands on what was mine. The negative energy is dispersed. When the necromancer turns his gaze to face this interloper, the vision had been fulfilled. The rival had been found. It was no dream. It was an omen of what was to come. I made a promise, and I aimed to keep it. Gone was Aran Vorlesh. What stood in front of him was the anathema, a giant wearing the most dazzling gold-plated armor he had ever seen, adorned with the effigy of an eagle and bejeweled with rubies that were the color of scarlet. A halo of luminous and ardent grace had become my crown, the visage of Aran Vorlesh. It had been sculptured to resemble that of the patriarch of House Vorlesh, the king of Aquilonia. My eyes were now a lustrous cerulean, when before they were a radiant crimson, the blade in my hand, the sword that had become the envy of every celestial in the higher planes. It was most certainly my radiance, but it had undergone a transfiguration itself. The guard had become an eagle, and it was engraved with the crest of the inheritor. I could hear her prayer. My Yomede was always watching over her herald, her champion, her emperor. Ijakshiti Wepiechor Esh. The usurper had been revealed. Vecna casts absolute death throughout all of existence. Negative energy erupted from every seam within this plane, the most powerful spell of all in his arsenal, the greatest achievement any necromancer could dream of. This magic would mean the destruction of all living things. All life would be extinguished. This universe would die, and so it does. All flora and fauna deteriorate. All mortals and immortals alike collapse to the ground unceremoniously. There would be no funeral for any of them. All planets that had any kind of life on them in our galaxy ceased to be. The sun was next. It died, and so did everything like it. Those constellations glimmering and glittering before blinking out of existence. In the primordial darkness of this universe, I had to watch it all, and I felt an inordinate measure of pity for Vecna. The undying king had no idea what I was about to do. Vecna turned his gaze back towards the anathema, and I began to laugh. Talk it. Why was I laughing at him? It was a mystery he could not decipher. And why did I live when everyone and everything else die? No, I will not. That is when I intone Rekindle. The spell is unleashed. The universe is reborn. The sun is reignited. All constellations return to their fixed position in the tapestry. All those lives salvaged from the wreckage that the necromancer left behind. Those worlds which had gone quiet, they were in an uproar, and there would be celebration. They had cheated death today. I had bested the dragon for them. I will never stop. I cast Wrath of the Righteous, and all of the monsters in Arlan's way begin to die. The walking dead are laid to rest. As for the vampires, they are no exception to this, and even those who have achieved ascension comically evaporate. My citizens would know that they have my protection. These people that I loved, this was the grievous miracle, the only miracle I had to give. E3K Rituli, how could it be? How could a mortal have this kind of power? Why? Only a minute left. I wouldn't waste it. When my fist slams against his head, his skull is splintered. It does not stop. This plane began to tremble, every galaxy shivering in abject horror when the force of my blow evokes a reality break and my adversary is forced through the universe. He is blown past the boundary between the planes, and it breaks like glass. Vecna plunges into the phlogiston, the ether between the crystal spheres, and sinks into one plane in particular. That would be enough to wound any deity, but not destroy them completely. I had to capitalize on it before he recovered. I had to be wary of the serpent as well. There was no telling when it would interfere. I chase after the cadaver, this corpse in waiting. When I intone sun form, I become the second sun and tackle the necromancer before he can reorient himself. We found ourselves in the astral plane, the realm of the Githyanki. They could do nothing but observe. The spectacle must have been entertaining for whomever was aware of this ruinous conflict. I pay them no heed and commence my duty. My mission would be accomplished. It is this judgment, this death sentence, the culmination of everything I would ever be. I told you, Vecna, I am your executioner. I grasp hold of his cervical vertebrae, and they begin to crack. The dark god can only squirm in my unbreakable grip. I am Aran Vorlesh. I am the one who slays the dragon. I intone Eye of the Sun, and I become ethereal. I am the journey in that instance, and there is a whisper, a quiet voice in the distance which could only be heard by those who believed in Aran Vorlesh. The words become clear. Let there be light. Engo, Vecna begs for mercy, but it will not come. He prays to the serpent, but this failure was to be his last. Neka, the Knight Commander, protects. I repeat it like a mantra. Vecna disappearing in the throes of my grace. This death would be no escape for him. There would be no afterlife. That soul of his had become nothing more than ashes in my embrace, purified by a promise I had made. No world shall be beyond my rule. No enemy shall be beyond my wrath. This blight torn from all of the planes in existence, there would be no realm that would know of this abomination. There would be no more innocents who would be subject to his repulsive delights. I had made certain of it.